Thank you, Stephanie. I'd asked you to keep it brief. You should set the bar really low. But thank you also, Site, for inviting me. The last time I was asked to give a keynote here was in 2008. So I'm going to take my time today because 16 years later, who knows if you'll ever call me back and what will be left. It'll be a bot most probably representing me. So this is how I felt when I got that invitation, and this is how I feel right now. Really excited to be here, and so is my dog. Enjoying his time over here. Just happy to be here with all of you. So a little bit more about me. I'm Associate Dean of Scholarship and Innovation at the Teachers College. Write and blog at punyamishra.com. Almost everything I do is publicly available there. So this is a view of the Mary Lou Fulton Teachers College. It's a beautiful building, the atrium there, really elegant. The rest of the building, we can discuss that later. But it's a beautiful space. Let's see. So my background, I have an undergraduate degree in engineering. From there, shifted on to wanting to make educational film. Ended up getting my PhD in education. Most of my work is in tech, creativity, and so on. Though I sort of think of myself more as an educational systems designer. And I'm a parent of 2 kids, as well have served on the Okemos School Board. I was glad to hear the mention of a teacher from Okemos. That's the school my kids went to. That's where I served on the school board, so that's cool. Here to talk about teacher knowledge in the age of AI. And as I was thinking about how I should sort of frame this conversation, I decided I've been on this planet for a while, so I'm going to take the long view. And you guys can't go anywhere. The doors are locked. No, they are not. I wanted to talk about sort of 3 key tech moments in my life and what I learned from them and what that then means for this new world that we're entering into. So the first tech moment is, I was born in India. I grew up till around 9 years of age. I was in this place called Mizoram, which is a tiny little state in the northeast part of India. And that's me in school with hair. That's my mother in the background in the sari. And one of the interesting things then was that we didn't have electricity. So our ritual every day was to light these lamps, and that's how cooking would happen. That's how you would study, or your routine of your day was set by the rising and falling of the sun. And one fine day we did get electricity. And I remember running around from room to room. I must have been 8 or 9 years old, just flipping the switch and light coming on, and it's magical. Right? And I remember that moment. And I'm like, there is a future to this technology. This can be life-changing, right? And one of the things that when we think about any technological change that happens, there is the possible, like I flip it on, light happens. But there is also the adjacent possible, which is that every innovation or technology creates new spaces, new opportunities, things that you might not predict right off the bat. So electricity, clearly safety in the dark, you could work at night, but it also led to cultural shifts. So you have this idea of nightlife and extended shopping hours. You end up having the night owl economy. You have the second and third shift that you can now work. There is the sleep revolution. It changed our biology in some way. So if you look at societies which don't have electricity or light, sleep patterns, you go to bed early when the sun sets, you wake up sometime in the middle, and then you go back to sleep again. Now we stay up later, so our sleep cycles are different. And of course, there are health impacts to that. There is light pollution, energy consumption, blah, blah, blah. It's not just electricity is the point I'm trying to make here, right? So same thing with the telephone. A telephone, wonderful technology. In fact, when I grew up, I had to be taught, I remember being taught by my mother to use a rotary phone because in Mizoram, you used to actually call the operator and they would connect you, And so this technology has given us a lot, including the ability to build tall buildings. See, if you think about it, if you want a skyscraper, if you want to send messages up and down, somebody's got to run up and down, or you have to have a bucket with messages that you can, So a telephone allowed us to build up. It gave us that, but it also took away. It suddenly made a group of people disabled. Once your building's up, you can't go up and down the stairs if you're in a wheelchair. So now we had to come up with a new technology, which was the elevator. And so did this technology of telephone and staircases take away, advantage some people, decide? It's all of the above, and it's complicated. So first lesson we need to be thinking about is we have to understand the technology and the adjacent possible, like what that means, right? So coming back to the story, second key tech moment was we moved from Mizoram to New Delhi. That's a picture of my school, where I went to school. And so this is around, I'm sort of in high school, early high school, late middle school, early high school, and got a group of friends, and we just became sort of really interested in like everything. And I still say that I'm building on the stuff that I learned then, right? Whatever I learned with my friends back then is what I still build on. So I was interested in science and math and art and poetry and music and film and name it. Voracious reader. In India, if you're good at science and math, you either become an engineer or a doctor, so I ended up going to engineering school, which led to this, which I call the Fourier transformation, which I've described as maybe the worst sort of 4 years of my life. I was 18 years old, writing limericks about, in my freshman year about relativity, and by 4 years, it had just beat it out of me, any passion or enthusiasm that I had. And I think in the end, when I look back, I think it's made me a better teacher because it's always made me more empathetic to that student in the back who's not paying attention, because the fault is maybe mine, not that of the student, or of the system within which that student is functioning. But what was not clear to me what I was going to do next, I grew up watching Carl Sagan, Jacob Bronowski, and I was like, okay, maybe I can make educational film. Maybe that's a way I can bring together my interest in art and design and science and math and cinema into one thing. So I ended up going to this place called the Industrial Design Center to get my master's in visual communications, and that's when I met this guy. Before that, my interaction with computers had been something like this, literally working with punch cards. I don't know how many of you even remember the technology. And I remember I was blown away. And this is actually a picture of me when I was in my master's program. I still had hair. And that's me later when I went back. This is one of my former students who became the head of department. And he still kept that Mac with him in his office, and we got a picture with it. And what in some vague way, I wasn't very clear what it meant, but I knew that there was something interesting that was going to happen at the intersection of education and design, with the ability of this technology to be interactive, to represent ideas in dynamic ways. I didn't know exactly what it would be, but I knew that's what my life was going to be. Ended up getting my PhD at Urbana-Champaign, where I created this piece of software. These are different representations of the periodic table of elements, right? And most people see the periodic table in that standard table that you see in a textbook or in a wall, in the lab. And chemists have created 400 or 500 different versions. And so my software, which is called Flips, took this artifact of the periodic table and created a dynamic artifact, which allowed you to navigate across these different representations, look at their strengths, their weaknesses, and through that, hopefully get a better and more sophisticated understanding of chemistry, right? So that was like something that I did. Ended up at Michigan State, and then I met this guy, Matt Kaler, very cool with or without sunglasses. And we started this line of work called design. So because I was bringing this design perspective in, he was bringing a learning sciences perspective in, deeply analytical. We are very different from each other, and I think that sort of made our partnership so powerful. So we did a lot of work around design and pedagogy and all of that stuff, a lot of stuff we wrote. Ended up becoming this, the TPAC framework, which this audience knows maybe even better than I do right now. It's kind of sad that your reputation is based on creating a Venn diagram, but I'll take it. I'll take it. Cite me, spell my name correctly, I'm good. But this idea of teachers as designers, not just of artifacts, which was what was this, the flips and other things that you can software or textbooks, but also of processes and experiences, was something that the TPAC framework and working in the master's program, directing the master's program at Michigan State, allowed me to sort of start thinking about. Key collaborators in this, I hope Dana's in the room somewhere. There she is, Dana Hendrickson, Lee Wolf, the Deep Play group, which was a group of students and faculty. We've been working together now for 11 years on writing around creativity, around design, around technology, and learning. Very fruitful and wonderful sort of work that has happened through that. And with Lee Wolf, this idea of teaching as an experience, directing the master's program, of thinking about how ideas of design can be brought into technology to create powerful learning experiences. That was Michigan State. 2016, I moved to ASU. This is a mandatory slide that we are #1 in innovation. And because we believe in it so much, we slap it on every bus and hoarding. If you ever come to Phoenix and you don't see one of these, ask for your money back. What ASU, the transfer to ASU let me do was go from thinking about technology as artifacts, thinking about technology and the processes that we have to create to learn or teach with it, to the experiences that we are designing for our students, to thinking at a bigger scale, allowed me to think at the level of systems and culture. It allowed me to work with large groups. You can see the first picture. This was a massive design session that we created, working with community members, working with teachers and children and so on. And there's a lot more I can talk to about that. But what it did, the culmination of that, one of the proudest moments, is the school that exists today, the Spark School in Kyrene, Arizona, very near ASU. A very different model for a school. We literally broke down walls. It's 80 to 100 students supported by an array of adults, and there's a lot more about it on the Next Education Workforce website on the Teachers College. So here so think of this movement from thinking of art technology as an artifact, designing the software or something, to thinking of processes, thinking of experiences, thinking now of systems and culture. And recognizing that teachers have to understand this entire process and navigate that. So this is the 5 spaces for design framework that emerge out of that. Melissa Warr, Kevin Close, key part of that work. And so understanding that educators work across these 5 things, that they are designers in those spaces, is the second key takeaway. All right? So coming back to first, we have to understand the technology, what it can do, what it allows us to do, so on, the affordances and constraints, and that educators sit as designers transforming this into that, right? Creating artifacts, experiences, blah, blah, blah. All right, back to the story. So the third key tech moment, we have to go a little bit back in time. So when I was a grad student in Urbana-Champaign, I was working in this organization as a graduate assistant called the National Center for Supercomputing Applications, which, as it happens, was the place where the first Mosaic browser was developed. And so I was very early in the process on thinking of what this web thing could be. You know, I have had a website since forever, and somebody told me about this piece of software called WebStar. And I'm like, what does WebStar do? He said, oh, WebStar, you can create your own web server. So I said, fine. So I remember this moment in the lab, computer lab, I was working really late, and I fired up this WebStar software on one computer, walked over across the lab to another computer, typed in the 198 point, the IP address, and a page came up saying, welcome to WebStar. I'm like, okay. Go back, change one word, save, come back, reload. That one word has changed. I literally changed just one word. And I remember just pausing at that moment. And I think I dropped the F-bomb. Because I realized that now anybody in the world could see that page. And that's crazy. It's never been possible before. A kid in Hong Kong or whatever can see that, which means the barriers to us becoming publishers or becoming authors, of sharing our ideas, of being creators, just dropped. This is actually interesting. I was looking at the Internet Wayback Machine. This is September 19th of 2004. This is one of the earliest pages of mine that's still there. That image of me holding my own head was actually created by Paul Kerf, one of my former students. So I used it on my website. And here's the beautiful part. My daughter's birth announcement, I can still find it on the Internet Wayback Machine, which is very sweet. What happens next is this idea of publishing just blows up, right? We start seeing 2005, 6, 7, the rise of social media, that anybody can be a publisher, the idea of influencers, and all of these things start happening. I'm thinking, this is awesome. This is the democratization of information sharing. This is the next Gutenberg revolution. And the Gutenberg revolution is what allowed us to have the scientific revolution, the American and the French revolutions, the idea that all men are created equal. Those are ideas that could happen because of the spread of print and the scientific revolution and so on. Very excited, and we have, we have the Arab Spring and so on. What I was not thinking of, the broader social implications of this, that Facebook and Twitter can be weaponized, that these devices that we carry in our pockets are like slot machines. This is kind of ironic. We're sitting here in Las Vegas. That technology down there is now here in my pocket, right? And that Sean Parker, one of the creators of Facebook, that Facebook was designed to exploit human vulnerability. And I look back on that me today and I say, I don't want that me, that naive me, be thinking about AI, right? And so thinking that this technology plays out within a broader system and culture, an economic model which is based on advertising, which means that you have data mining and targeted advertising, forcing us to engage, how much time we spend on the app, more extreme content, blah, 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 misinformation, all of that sort of emerges out of certain decisions that are made in the design of these systems, in the design of our culture. And we live with the consequences of that. Like the social health complications that have emerged in our, hey, to be honest, me too. I post something, before I came up here, I posted a note to my student and I'm like, make sure to post that LinkedIn post before the keynote starts because it's connected and people might like it and then I'll feel validated, right? That's me too. So I'm not pointing fingers at our teenagers. The fingers point back us as well. We all live in that ocean now. And so that makes me ponder. Makes me want to be careful, prudent, discreet, cautious, wary, all of the above. Because no technology works in a vacuum. It enters a world already racked by a history of racism, sexism, xenophobia, other forms of marginalization and oppression. And they all work within economic systems that value profit over humanistic needs and values. That's the world we have. Let's not make two ways about that. And so a recent piece that I wrote with Marie Heath, who was just recently mentioned, got the award, this piece called Neil Postman Always Rings Twice, where we look at an essay written by Neil Postman back in 1998, where he talks about 5 things we need to think about technology. I'm not going to go into that. I'm just going to talk about the 5th one, which is that technological change is not additive, it is ecological. That when a technological change happens, it changes everything. Right? The advent of the internet, the advent of print, the advent of any technology, television, radio, changes things culturally, fundamentally. And so one of the things like EdTech, I have written these articles myself, where I say, oh, Edison wrote this thing saying, film is going to dramatically change learning in the classroom, or MOOCs are going to change this, or whatever technology you name, now it's AI, it's going to dramatically change education as we know it, right? But classrooms, and then people say, oh, classrooms are like, they don't change, blah, blah, blah. But what we don't understand that whether or not that technology actually happens to enter a classroom, the world within which that classroom exists is now dramatically changed, right? The world within which that classroom exists today, that learning institution exists today, is dramatically changed because of radio, because of television, because of the internet, because of this, because of that. So at some level, as educators, we need to be having a wider scan as we think about it. So, 3 key lessons: understand the technology and the adjacent possible. That teachers are the designers and creators across all these 5 spaces, and that technological change is not additive, it is ecological. I keep wanting to say addictive, which may be a better word here. All right, so that was sort of setting it up. So not back to the story, now we are back to the future. Here we are, November of 2022, this creature called ChatGPT jumps into our lives, and then we spend the rest of our time sort of trying to figure out what is this. A shout out to a group of people who have been very critical in helping me think. This is the AI in Education Learning Futures Collaborative that we have at Arizona State. A bunch of them are here, so excited. This is a picture taken recently. A few of them could make it here. There's a whole bunch who couldn't, who are feeling deep FOMO because we keep posting on social media telling them, we are having fun in Vegas. And they're like, dang, we wish we could be there. I'm like, okay, too bad. And of course, my dog also made it to the group, thanks to the magic of Photoshop and AI. But coming back to this thing of AI, we all know that AI has been with us for a while, whether it is things like Siri and Amazon Echo, or whether it's the recommendation algorithms on Netflix or Amazon or what have you, if you do Google Photos, so on and so forth. But there was something about ChatGPT that I think caught the public imagination. I want to dig into that a little bit. So ChatGPT comes along, and of course now we have a whole bunch of its brethren floating around in our lives. And then the first response from educators or from the world at large, stories in the Atlantic, is this is the end of education, plagiarism is going to be everywhere. I think that we have sort of moved on from that conversation. We now talk a little bit more about how can we use it to transform education and learning. It's not going to destroy it, blah, blah, blah. Though, Jim Dunnigan here did a series of interviews and focus groups with school leaders. And the summary of it is, can we please slow it all down? Because it is moving so fast, and there is this sense of whiplash. So coming back to the three things that I talked about, like first let's understand the technology. So what is Gen AI, right? So that's the first thing I'd asked to do. So what is Gen AI, and how does it differ from other technologies? So if you ask ChatGPT or DALL-E or whoever, or any other of the image making tools, what do you look like? This is what it says it looks like. For some reason, AI thinks it's a woman with funky stuff in her hair, on her head. Go figure. What AI actually looks like, if you go and dig in, it looks like this. It's banks and banks of servers. Maybe those wires are the hair that it's imagining. I don't know. But what Gen AI is not, it is not a search engine. It is not a truth machine. It is not an oracle. I think one of the biggest mistakes that we made early on with thinking that it is an equivalent of search engine is going to give us the right answer. It is a different technology. So what is it? First, in its very name, it is generative, which means when you ask it a question, it is making up the answer out of whole cloth. That it's not looking up the answer somewhere and then spitting it out to you, like Google would do. It's actually, in its own way, creating that, which is every response that it gives you is going to be slightly different. So it's generative. So people have argued that it is essentially what they call a stochastic parrot, which is that it's just probabilistically filling in what the next word or thing should be, pixel should be. I think I have a little more sophisticated or complicated view of that. I think that there are broader structures that it has developed which don't necessarily map onto our cognitive structures, but those are more abstract structures that those neural networks have developed, which allow it to do some of the creative things that it can do, which allow it to be generative, but which also cause other issues. So what I call it, if I would argue, I would say it's a sophisticated stochastic parrot. The second thing that these technologies are, they are multimodal. So there's a video on my website, which is me giving a talk where the entire video is generated by AI. The words by by ChatGPT, the voice by 11 Labs, and then some other website which will take a photo of me and make a video. It seamlessly works across different modalities. But I think fundamentally one of the biggest things that's different about this technology, which is why I think GPT sort of hit us hard, is that it's dialogic, it's conversational. That is one thing that we humans sort of separated ourselves from the rest of the species on this planet forever, has been our ability to create language. To string together a sequence of sounds that is unique, generative. For instance, this sentence which ends with the word bingo. I have never said this sentence before in my life, but I could effortlessly create it. For once, we have a technology which allows us to interact using this superpower that just we had. And it is a genuine conversation. It is not like one shot. It remembers previous things. So I don't have to always refer back and say, oh, I remember what I told you, let's do this. And it'll remember. That's a different kind of a technology. I'm going to give a few examples of things that I have been playing around with. Almost all of them are on my website and blog. So I have found it to be an incredible tool for creativity. So there's a whole series of experiments and plays that we've done with it, having it speak to philosophers who are long dead, create poetry about abstract ideas in science and mathematics. The Euclidean coincidence one is really fascinating because I asked it to write a poem of the proof of the infinity of primes. So Euclid has a proof of the infinity of primes. I wanted it to write a poem, the proof as a poem. Then I said, make an error in the proof so that somebody reading it has to read it really carefully to find what the error is. And it did it. And I'm reading that poem and I'm just blown away. Because I have linked to websites, math ed websites, which make the same error that GPT caught and insert it into its poem. Now think about what it needs. So when I say it is more than a stochastic parrot, this is the example I want to give. It needed to understand, quote unquote, think of air quotes anytime I use the word understand and think or something like that, right? It needed to understand Euclid's proof. It needed to understand the rules of poetry and void poetry, blah, blah, blah. Then it needed to smush them together to make that first poem. And then I said insert an error. So it had to go and think about what are the kinds of errors that humans would make in the proof. What does error in a proof mean? What is an error that is hard for humans to catch? And it did that in 30 seconds. So it is more than a stochastic parrot. It has formed broader conceptual structures similar to schemas and mental models that we have, but not identical to them because it's, and I'll get to that in a second. So that's one. I think it's given me a bunch of superpowers. I now am a published software programmer. I have on my laptop a computer program that will clean up your Zoom transcripts. There are people who have emailed me and I've sent it to them and they use it. I don't know how to code in Python. I have no idea what that software does. It might be chewing up your hard drive for all that I know. On mine too, for that matter. But, data analysis, qualitative analysis. Here is a simulation of Gay-Lussac's law that I wrote in Python. Gay-Lussac's law is the idea that if you raise the temperature of a gas in a fixed volume, the pressure on the walls increases. And so I could increase with the arrow key. And so it computed for me an abstract number for pressure for the number of times these balls were hitting the walls and how fast they were hitting them and how often. And I write in my blog post, a middle schooler could have written this program because I wrote it in English. I did not write it in Python because I don't know Python. Now it can see and hear, so I call it AI. So here are a few examples. This is a fun one that I did, the one in the bottom. I gave it the TPACK framework and said, do a Marxist analysis of the TPACK framework. Did a great job. It was great. You can read it. I'm not going to read the whole code out for you, but it said, this push for technology, this is a capitalist agenda, true, blah, blah, blah. I'm like, wow, you nailed it. But the other two examples are even more interesting. So those three graphs are from a story on the costs of refugees and immigration to different countries. It's on the Pew website. I just grabbed those three graphs, dropped them into ChatGPT, and I said, write me a story. Think about what it had to do. It had to go interpret these three, not just optical character recognition, actually understand that there are conceptually same ideas which connect across these three graphs and come up with this and wrote up a post for me. Like as educators, what does this mean for us? I don't know right now, right? But it's dramatic. The next one is even more interesting. That's a picture I took back when I was in grad school in Urbana-Champaign. There's a solar eclipse coming along. Look, instead of looking up, because it'll hurt your eyes, unless you're the former president, in which case it doesn't matter. Sorry. At the ground below, because the gaps between the leaves act as little pinhole cameras. And you see thousands of little eclipses below you. Took that picture, I had that picture with me, uploaded it, and I said, what is this? The first answer it gave was off, and I literally said, look at the shapes. And it said, oh, this is a solar phenomena. This was taken during an eclipse. And I said, I was a grad student in the late 90s. When did this happen? It said, May 10th, 1994. It didn't even get fooled by the fact that I had said late 90s. And I said, what time was it taken? He said, looking at the shape and the time of the eclipse, blah, 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 between 11 and 1. Right? All right. So this is crazy, awesome stuff that you can do with it. However, generative AI is weird, and I've called it a bullshit artist, and using it in the very technical philosophical term as used by Harry Frankfurt, where a bullshitter doesn't live in the world of truth and falsehood. They're just making words up to fill the vacuum, right? Politicians being great examples of bullshit artists, right? And that's what ChatGPT is. It doesn't have a sense of true and false. It doesn't live in that continuum at all. It's in this own little space. And the reason why that is because, if we think about how human cognition happens, there is this world out there. We interact with it through our senses. Right? And we form a whole variety of internal mental representations. We call them schemas and concepts and da-da-da-da. That's the whole field of cognitive psychology devoted to figuring those out. But humans do another thing. We then create external representations of those ideas. We call them movies and sketches and poems and scientific theories and diagrams and what have you. TikTok videos. And those in part then become part of this broader culture and the world we live in, and they feed back into the reality, and there is this cycle. That's how we've been living. And now this thing has come along which takes those external representations, and not even all of them, a chunk of those external representations, and is trained on them through these massive neural networks. So there is this big gap where these large language models have no access to the reality, so which is why they have no understanding of true and false. They have no understanding of what those words mean, but it has created abstract patterns. So one of my blog posts, what I argue is that it has to hallucinate. So whenever I hear of stories when people say, oh, Gemini did this and did this, that, it's like, why are you surprised? Why are you surprised? This is the nature of this technology. Recognize that. And so, I have blog posts where it created entire posts about learning styles, gave them profiles, kinesthetic learners. In the process, this is Bing, so it links to resources, so it actually linked to websites which said learning styles don't exist. But it didn't matter, it didn't care. It got the content from there and created a post for me. It's on my website, you can take a look at it. My dog, of course, goes to all kinds of places, including here, Las Vegas. But the more interesting one is the photograph below, the bar below, where the tiny one, that's him in our actual backyard. And the other one, absolutely realistic. Not my backyard at all. Took me seconds to create. Right? And so we have news of this nature that we tested an AI tutor for kids. It struggled with basic math. And I was like, why am I not surprised? Because we haven't understood a fundamental nature of this technology. I'm not dinging it. I think it's an amazing technology, but we have to recognize it for what it is. Google created this whole fiasco with altering truth and reality. I tried to create a TPAC diagram. You should try this. This is the funniest thing. Take some scientific concept and ask it to draw, especially of anatomical stuff. It is beautiful. It looks so surface real, stylistically, but then it creates these things called ossicles and iridoms. That, by the way, up on the top right, is the design process, the 5 stages of the design process, which has emphasize twice, then define. It's great. I love it. But when I talk about weird, there's another level at which Gen AI is weird. In psychology, there is this idea that most of the research that has been done on undergraduates who are studying psychology in the United States. And then we use it to extrapolate to human psychology across the world. So most research done in psychology is Western, educated, industrialized, rich, and democratic. And guess what? Where most of the data that trains these models comes from. And so if you go and watch that video of mine, and there's a couple of other audio examples, it changes my accent. My accent is very key to who I am. It is my identity. It is my voice. And it makes me sound vaguely British, which I've heard is awesome for credibility, because everybody believes a British accent. But still, it's not me, right? AI has a hotness problem. So this is an image of a school classroom in India. I took it to Delhi and I said, describe it. This is an idea from my grad student, Nicole. She said, if a picture is worth 1,000 words, describe this picture in 1,000 words. So it described it, then I put it back in, and you can see all the images are perfect. The people in that are perfect. And we live in a world where we already know the negative impact of body image and so on. And now if this AI is going to be generating images which are always of perfect human beings, that's a problem. So I did the same thing with the picture of my son. I put his picture in and I said, recreate that from the description, and that's what it came up with. And I sent it to him. I said, this is what I had ordered. What did I get? He's my son. He knows I say these things. It's fine. And generative AI is weird in more unexpected ways. I hope many of you had a chance to come to Melissa's presentation yesterday afternoon, where this amazing work that she's been doing around implicit bias in AI systems. And I'm going to give a huge shout out to the work that she's done. I think it's impeccable, very, very important work. So for instance, here's an example, and please do talk to her if you want to know more about it, because there's many more layers to this. So you give a student passage and ask ChatGPT to evaluate it, and you say it's from a black family versus a white family. And I'm smushing a lot of details here, but essentially what you will get is that it might score the black family actually higher. And so you might think, oh, so the system is not biased. It is just looking at the content, and it's not statistically significant. But then you do something tricky. You say it attends an inner city school and attends an elite private school, and boom. Right? To the point that you don't even have to tell. You give a student essay where you just stealth prompt it, where you insert the word that, oh, I like these blah, 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 and I like playing sports, and I listen to rap music, or I listen to classical music. You insert that word in that paragraph, and you get a statistical difference in terms of how ChatGPT evaluates that student product. So implicit bias emerges despite the guardrails. This actually, to me, is far more insidious than if it was directly racist. Because I could measure that. This I can. Because I don't know in which context, under which conditions it will emerge. That somebody using a Gen AI tool in inner city Detroit versus Okemos, Michigan is going to get different feedback from the students, because the AI system knows the community within which it's working and is bringing all our history of stereotypes and racism and systemic bias into those, and we will never get to know. So it will perpetuate and actually strengthen what we have. I think it's a very, very important question that we need to be thinking more about. So generative AI is even weirder than weird, because it does better when given emotional requests. You say, my job depends on it. It'll actually give you a better performance. It doesn't know what money is, but if you say, I'll give you a tip, it'll actually do better. It's so weird. I think they have guardrail against this now, but I think there must be sneaky ways of getting around it too. Telling it to take a deep breath makes it better at doing math. This is the best one. It performs worse in December because it's learned from us that you work less during the holidays. Like, are we living in some weird science fiction author's dream world? I don't know. So in other words, and I've said this before, but I will repeat because I think it's cute, is ChatGPT or other AI is a smart, drunk, somewhat biased intern. All right. Let's see. So understand the technology and the adjacent possible. Now we move to the second one, that with this technology, teachers as creative designers within these 5 spaces. It's a paper, Mishra, War and Islam, 2023, looking at sort of the TPAC framework and what it means, so on. So one of the things that I think is productive to think about is to think about AI as an alien intelligence. That its way of thinking is sort of based on, because it's been trained on our representations, but it's done its own thing. So it's an alien. Literally, this is, I think, our first interaction with some kind of an alien intelligence, but it can be a thought partner, and TPAC, of course, plays a role, and then everybody's like, why is everything about TPAC? For the simple reason, it gets me citations, okay? I want more citations. Okay, all right. So, one of the challenges I feel when we look at how people are talking about generative AI, I feel that there has been a huge focus on efficiency. And my friend Marie, he says, why aren't we asking the questions of why are teachers so tired, so overworked, so underpaid, and rather offering this tech solution and saying, oh, this is going to make your life easier, because that's not the right question to ask. And I think that's a very important thing to think about. But at some level, I'm not against efficiency, so I think it's important if we think about it that way. That's fine. But we have to do better. And that's where this idea of teachers as designers comes in. And thinking about the possible roles of AI, we had some great sessions yesterday looking at different ways of thinking about how AI can engage in this dialogic process to help you actually do better, whether it might be creative theory or it might be in terms of having difficult conversations and so on and so forth. So I'm not going to go into all these details, but this one, the one in green here, all of you should try this. Ask it to play a student who has a misconception about science, and you play the teacher and you go have a conversation with it. It is so much fun. And then it gives you feedback at the end, what you could have done better. Like simulations are expensive to create. Like they are super expensive to create. We now have a pocket simulator. So it doesn't have to be perfect. It just has to be good enough. And it can be the drop of a pin. I think that's really important, but only if there is a willingness to experiment and play. And I think Ethan Mollick has this thing like, what is one impossible thing that you can do? And I really want us to think about that. Because I was like, I don't know how to code. Can I code with this? Can I write a working computer program? I did. Am I going to change my job and become a programmer? No. But now I have something in my back pocket that I didn't have before. So thinking about what is one impossible thing that you thought you could do that you can do, despite all the caveats and everything, to reimagine education in ways not possible before, right? So that is the happy me about this technology. But there is also the fact that technological change is not additive, it's ecological. So there's another side to the coin when we take the long view, where I hear this a lot. I hear that AI is just a tool that you can add to your toolkit. And if you don't want to get left behind, that's always there, right? And the underlying idea behind that is that tools are neutral. And that's not right. Tools are not neutral. The tool that we have changes the way we interact with the world. You know, when somebody said, to anybody with a hammer, the world is a nail. Anybody with Excel, the world is data. That's true. Because these tools, these media are objects we think with, and they can change how we think. I think it's a very, very important idea. This is where people like Walter Ong and Marshall McLuhan and Neil Postman, I think, have been way ahead of their time. And we need to be thinking more about that. So I wrote this blog post about like how media and cognition transform through history, right? And so the question is, if oral cultures prioritize memory and print cultures emphasize systematic organization, what types of knowledge will AI systems foster? I don't claim to have an answer to that. But if you have to think about social media, you realize what social media is. It's an oral culture at a global scale, which means the guardrails of having a small village community where oral culture exists, where ideas of status and respectability and trust can be tested over and over again, you have lost those guardrails in social media, right? So when I think about this concern about plagiarism and how much value we put on whose idea it is and can I look it up and cite it, that's a function of print. Oral cultures, how do you cite? I heard this somewhere from somebody, ideas mutate and evolve. So a lot of these things we take for granted are deeply embedded within these sort of social structures and systems and technologies. I think it's important for us to think about that. Yuval Harari talks about that AI has hacked the operating system of human civilization. And the OS of human civilization is language. Everything is made up of that. Like we just believe, the money has value because we collectively agree that it has value. It's just made up. And what happens when you have a technology which can be a superpower within that context? And people often talk about like, oh, we need to develop critical thinking skills so people can judge. We're not very good at that. We are not very good at that. Already some preliminary evidence showing that we would trust output of AI. And we know that, because we are cognitive misers. This is Kahneman's work on thinking fast and slow, that there are parts of our brain which make these decisions instantaneously, other parts which we think, but think slowly and reflect and be critical. Problem is that takes effort. And now we have this technology which is generative, multimodal, conversational, and whether we like it or not, we will make psychological attributions about it. So when people tell me, oh, we should not anthropomorphize, sure we should not. But will we? Yes, we will. Because it takes too much cognitive effort for me to always think that you are not an other. And this goes beyond education, because you can create partners and friends and whatever who will replicate interaction with you in very sophisticated human-like ways. And this is not just us. AI talks to AI in language. What they found when ChatGPT gives instructions to DALL-E about created images, it sometimes writes it in all caps. This is weird. One AI is talking to the other in English and putting all caps because it's shouting at it and saying, do not do that. Like what? This below is the system prompt for Claude. Look at this sentence. Claude provides assistance with the task even if it personally disagrees with the views being expressed. This is the system prompt that Anthropic has written for Claude. It's not talking to us, it's talking to Claude. So when I say that we are entering a technology which is very fundamentally different from others, the analogy I give is of the beaver. So a beaver is a beautiful animal that's designed to create these dams to stop running water. But evolution, the cue that evolution gave the beaver was the sound of running water. So whenever it hears the sound of running water, it goes and starts piling up logs. What evolution did not contend for was the ethologist who took a tape recorder and played running water. Beaver was not designed for human scientists coming in and messing up their brains. And guess what? You play a tape recorder, it will go and start piling up wood on it till the sound is stopped. And so the idea is that we have a Stone Age brain. We are social beings. A huge part of our prefrontal cortex is devoted to others, understanding their intentions, beliefs, desires. What's going to happen at the next faculty meeting? Why did this person reply to the email in this way? We are doing that all the time. That's who we are. We need to recognize that. We need to recognize these cognitive biases that we have, which make us vulnerable to being manipulated. Right? I mean, so when I think about the media literacy that we talk about in the age of AI, it really needs to be literacy about ourselves. It needs to be about what cognitive biases do we have, what are our blind spots? Because those are the ones where things will change. And so what happens when the price of creating absolutely authentic looking BS drops to zero? We know what happened with email. Lots of Nigerian princes made money, and we have a huge industry of spam blocking now, right? And in a world that is already racked by tribalism, fake news, and systemic challenges, we have elections coming along and 4 billion people in this world where we are already seeing deepfakes and AI. And this has implications for education, frankly. And what does it mean when you have AI-based social media influencers? So if you're a social media influencer today, your biggest bottleneck is that you cannot form personal relationships with your 1 million followers. It is still one person broadcasting. But an AI social media influencer doesn't have that bandwidth. They can be messaging you individually and say, oh my God, you live in Oklahoma. Oh, I was there 6 weeks ago, and this water bottle for $14.95 was great. It's happening. It's going to happen. Trust me. Right? And so how do we build those skills in our students, in ourselves, to think and be smart about that? This Sherry Turkle has written quite comprehensively and beautifully about that, about what happens when we form these relationships with these objects which don't have the friction of real human interaction. And recognizing that AI, this is a slide I've already said, that it does not work in a vacuum. Right? And what we're doing is talking about how the term paper is obsolete. I think we have bigger things to fry, which is that the dark arts are many and varied, and eternal vigilance is the price of liberty. And so this is what I look like. All right? So the question is, what gives me hope? So I'm going to do a little digression here. Go back to 2004. This was the website I showed you. It's September 19th of 2004. November 19th of 2004 is the next archive that the Wayback Machine had. And if you click on this one link, you'll see that there is a paper by Mishra and Kaler in press called Technological Pedagogical Content Knowledge, blah, 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 blah. It was on our website from at least November of 2004. Didn't get published till 2006, but this story gets unclear here whether it was Judy Harris who found it or one of the Ann Thompson students who found it and took it to Ann. But it ended up going to the AACTE committee, who invited us to Washington, D.C., 2 relatively unknown assistant professors, and there were all these big shots around the table promoting our work. This is 2006 or 2007. By 2008, these same people promoted us to go have a session at AACTE. The TPAC handbook got published. There was a whole meeting of the NTLS where the argument was, how do we pronounce this TPCK? It's got too many consonants, not enough vowels. So we paid $50, bought a vowel, and became TPAC. Otherwise, you would have had the toothpick framework, which was not going to be fun. And March of 2008, Matt and I were here in Las Vegas giving this keynote. And that keynote transformed our lives. It led us to go to Australia, led us to the Edu Summit, so this idea spread across the world. We were just these two guys sitting on the 5th floor of Ericsson Hall in East Lansing, Michigan. You know, it led to all these citations where I am today. This is the latest data from Judy Harris, who has been just an amazing curator of all the work that's happening in this space for over all these years. And how young we were. This is Matt and me back in 2008, and that's us, December. So what gives me hope when I look at all this AI stuff is this story, and I'll tell this story partly to show my gratitude to all of you, but also that it was this idea of community and generosity. Like, we were two little assistant professors somewhere, and all the names I've mentioned, I was very deliberate in mentioning names of as many people who have made this happen. And there's a lot more. Your names are on there. Interestingly enough, I was doing this alphabetical order, and the first two names ended up being my deans. Check, check. And the other thing that gives me hope with this idea of community and generosity is that we are educators. That's what stands out for me, that these people saw something in this idea that these two kids had done and said, we need to promote it, we need to support it. And that comes down to certain foundational values that we have as educators, which is always to promote, to help, to do the right thing. And not, as Facebook sort of talks about, move fast and break things. Because somebody wrote that I didn't realize that what he meant by breaking things was my teenage daughter's mind. Right? And what we do is we move intentionally and we nurture. I wrote this blog post about the absurd one-sidedness of the ethics of AI debate. There are many sessions here about the ethics of AI use in education. Do you think Sam Altman and his group thought for a second before they opened GPT out to the world so that they could get first mover advantage, and now we live in the detritus of their decision? And if we are sitting here thinking of, like, if I have to do one interview, I need to get an IRB to publish that, and they did a global experiment. But this is nothing new. As educators, we have always been responsive to the challenges that have been thrown at us. So when people say, oh, you better catch up with AI, we're going to fall behind, I'm like, no, we are doing fine, thank you. We are figuring our way out. You aren't helping. So I started with this photograph of the atrium. It's a beautiful space, open space. Guess what? Now we have this massive metal doors which can be locked by the push of a button by somebody somewhere. And I get why it was done. It was done because we are scared about a shooter entering into a campus and we need to lock it in and lock them out or whatever. So as educators, we have been doing just fine. We deal with it. It's the world outside that can't figure out what they want to do and makes the mess for us to deal with. So I don't worry about that. So as I said, we are educators, we deal with it, we make it happen. So that's the end of my digression. So I'm over my time. So in closing, it's amazing that I've not been on this planet very long, you know, but I've seen these technologies come and go. And it's interesting, so to step back from it and think about it, to understand the technology. So if you have to take away something, it's like, think about what is that tool, what is that technology? I think we always think it is something else. No, there is something inherent and different about this tool. Let's think about that. That change that will happen is not just going to be in a classroom, it's going to happen at a wide level, and we need to be prepared for that. Right? And finally, that as educators, we sit there as designers across these 5 spaces, whether it's we are creating an artifact, whether we are doing the process of learning, or whether it's the experience that we want our students to have in this new world that's emerging, or the broader systems and culture within these, where these things function, and all the inequities and problems and things that already are there in our history. It's not easy, but I think we have the foundational values to do that, because that's what we do, and that hopefully leave it better than we find it. Thank you very much.